All right, so I hope you enjoyed your break, and now we're gonna go to talk about the side bonds of the cortex. The cortex of the hair, which is, if you remember, you have the cuticle on the outside, cortex is in the middle. That's all that we care about is those two. We don't care about the medulla. Poor medulla. It's getting neglected. But no, we don't need the medulla. It's not a concern of ours. We only need to be concerned about the cortex and the cuticle. The cortex is made up of millions of polypeptide chains. Polypeptide chains are cross-linked like rungs on a ladder by 3 different types of side bonds that link the polypeptides chains together and are responsible for extreme strength and elasticity of human hair. So the 3 types of bonds are hydrogen bonds, salt bonds, and disulfide bonds. These bonds are essential to services such as wet setting, thermal styling, permanent waving, and chemical relaxing. The 3 types of side bonds are in that chart right there. So the first bond we're going to talk about is the weakest one. It's a hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bond is going to be the weak bond. That's a physical cross-linked side bond that is easily broken down by water or heat. So think about it like this. When we have curly hair like mine, if I take a flat iron and I go through and I tap, tap, smooth, smooth, my hair is temporarily being denatured, because if you remember what proteins, heat denatures proteins. What I'm doing with that heat is I'm adding heat. It's going to smooth that cuticle. It's going to heat up that cortex, and in the cortex, those proteins are going to cause the hydrogen bonds to denature, and that's going to hold my hair in that straight position. Likewise, if I'm using a curling iron, it's going to work the same way. If I have wet hair and I'm going to wet set it, the reason why wet sets work a little bit longer is because you're actually physically setting it in place and you're heating it up. So hydrogen bonds, if you have someone with straight hair and they leave the salon and it's raining out and they get all watered on and there's humidity, what's going to happen is that water is going to enter the hair again, and it's going to not temporarily, it's actually going to reverse what we just did. So those hydrogen bonds are going to get resetted when you re-wet them. That's why when you flat iron your hair, shampoo and condition your hair goes back to normal. The one exception to this, if you have extreme heat like that of a keratin treatment, it's called a semi-permanent straightening service, because if you use too much heat, you can actually damage other bonds in the hair, and that will actually cause your hair to not reform as well as it used to. So extreme heat, if you have ever seen people with kinky, coily hair and they do the pressing comb, if it's way too hot, over time, you'll see that their root is nice and healthy. I mean, the regrowth is nice and healthy, and then the end of their hair is a little bit looser, and that's because they did permanent damage. And the way to solve that is to do the big chop. So know that hydrogen bonds reform when the hair dries. That's why when you wet set it and you're finding the pattern of the hair, using some rollers in, it will reform in the new position you put it in temporarily. The next type of bond is weak, but not as weak as a hydrogen bond. It's a salt bond. It's a physical cross-linked side bond between polypeptide chains. So the salt bonds depend on the pH. They're easily broken down by strong alkaline or acidic solutions. Even though the bonds are weak, there are so many of them, they account for about 1/3 of the hair's total strength. So salt bonds, another way to remember this is if you think about a salt bond, if you're going to change your hair's texture using pH, if you remember salt sprays and they were popular when that beachy trend was in, you'll spray your hair. That salt solution you're spraying is alkaline, and what that's going to do is going to swell your hair. It's actually going to break some of the salt bonds temporarily, and when you diffuse your hair with the heat, you're going to be messing with the hydrogen bonds. So those are going to be interacting with one another. So when you think about salt bonds being broken, think about salt spray, because that will break those bonds. The next type of bond is very strong. It's the disulfide bond. It's a strong chemical bond that is very different from physical side bonds of a hydrogen or salt bond. The disulfide bond, just like it sounds because there's a sulfide in there, it joins a sulfur atoms to 2 neighboring cysteine amino acids to create one cysteine. The cysteine joins together 2 polypeptide strands. Although there are far fewer disulfide bonds than hydrogen or salt bonds, disulfide bonds are so much stronger they account for about 1/3 of the hair's overall strength. So if you think about you're dividing the hair strength up into thirds, it's going to be hydrogen bonds, salt bonds, and disulfide bonds. One of the things you'll learn, and make sure you read this chart on the bonds, hydrogen bonds are weak, they're broken down by water or heat, and they're reformed by drying or cooling. Salt bonds are weak physical bonds, they're broken by changes in pH, and they're reformed by normalizing pH. Disulfide bonds are strong chemical bonds, they're broken by thioperms and thiorelaxers, hydroxide relaxers, and extreme heat, and they're reformed with oxidation with a neutralizer, or converted into lanthionine bonds. That cysteine is important to know because when you start learning about perms, you learn that there's a special perm called the thiophree perm, and it uses that same amino acid to actually go in the hair's cortex and break those special disulfide bonds. So I think that's pretty cool how that same type of chemical can be used to cause a chemical change. And I know that sounds confusing. Don't worry about memorizing all of it. You will get it eventually. You will know that disulfide bonds, like I mentioned, are not broken by water. They are broken by permanent waves and relaxers that alter the shape of the hair. If you use excessive heat, you can actually do damage here, which, like I mentioned before, with the keratin treatment. So thiopermanent waves break disulfide bonds and reform the bonds with thioneutralizers. Hydroxide chemical relaxers break the disulfide bonds and convert them into lanthionine bonds when the relaxer is rinsed from the hair. The disulfide bonds are then treated with hydroxide relaxers are broken permanently and can never be reformed. So lanthionine bonds are really cool when you do your additional research on that. It's a very special type of bond, and the way that you change the hair chemically to a lanthionine bond, it's why that when you work with a true hydroxide relaxer, if you put any kind of peroxide on it, it can cause a bad reaction. It's because of the type of bond you make. And lastly, peptide bonds or N bonds, we don't really talk too much about them because they're very strong, and they're broken only by chemical depilatories, and they are not reformed because the hair dissolves. So if you think about when you have a relaxer fail, if you've listened to videos when people do hair relaxers wrong, if you do a hair relaxer wrong, you can actually cause the hair to slide right off the scalp, or when you're using Nair. So for example, people buy into the marketing of Nair and they say, oh, it's conditioning formula. Let me tell you something. You cannot get a conditioning Nair formula because it's a depilatory. You put that on the hair, what's going to happen, it's going to cause the hair to start breaking down. It's going to go right in there and it will dissolve the peptide bonds. Once you dissolve those peptide bonds, there's nothing left. That's why certain chemicals, like if you over bleach the hair, they can start to feel gummy. If you over relax, it will gum right off. That's what's being broken down. So on to hair pigment. All natural hair color is a result of pigment, which is going to be in the cortex. This is going to be from two types of melanin. There's eumelanin and pheomelanin. So eumelanin provides natural dark blonde and black to hair, and pheomelanin provides natural colors ranging from red and ginger to yellow or blonde tones. So I always tell students to try to make your own mnemonic devices that stick with you. I always try to remember U blue for eumelanin, because if you think about black hair, black can almost have a blue tinge. So U blue black, eumelanin. And pheo yellow, to remember that pheomelanin is going to be your natural redheads and your natural blondes. All natural hair is the result of a specific ratio of eumelanin to pheomelanin, with the total number and size in pigment granules. If you have frequent pigment granules, you'll have more pigment. If your pigment granules are huge, you're going to have darker hair. So wave pattern is next, and wave pattern of the hair refers to the shape of the hair strand. It is described as straight, wavy, curly, or extremely curly, sometimes also called kinky or coily. Also read the Did You Know box, because I thought this was pretty cool. Hair color, which is 2 words, refers to color of the hair created by nature. Hair color, 1 word, is a term used by beauty industries to refer to hair color that we use when we color hair. Gray hair is caused by the absence of melanin. Gray hair grows from the hair bulb in exactly the same way pigmented hair grows. It has the same structure but without melanin pigment. This is not correct. The book also talks about this in the myth. Gray hair is actually structurally different than regular hair. We've proven that with research. When I go to my continuing education classes, we learn that gray hair is thicker, it's more wiry, it's got a thicker cuticle. It's actually much different than hair, and there's different theories on how gray hair is formed. So take this last part for a grain of salt. So natural wave patterns are a result of genetics, and the book will talk about your ethnic background. I think this is pretty cool because this is the only time it's really appropriate to talk about your ethnicity and its importance to cosmetology, because it really doesn't matter. But when we talk about hair, and it's important to know, we get curious. Technically, any race can have any different texture of hair. There are people that are Asian with naturally curly hair. There are people that are black with naturally blonde hair that's a little bit straighter. It does exist. So they use the example that Caucasians can have straight, curly or wavy hair. African Americans tend to have extremely curly hair. But straight, wavy, curly, and extremely curly hair occur in all races, especially in mixed races, because these days a lot of people are from different cultures, different races. So now we really never know what we're going to get. And there was even an older way of classifying hair color way back in the day. If you ever read an older coloring book, that they'll classify your ethnic background and how your hair will accept color. And what that's really going on about is how typically if someone is white, you have such a diversity in texture, but someone's black, you know that the hair is typically curly. And what happens with curly hair, it tends to be very resistant to hair color. So that's something to keep in mind. Someone who's Asian has straight hair, but we also found that Asian hair is also extremely resistant to hair color, but they take perms really well because there's not enough bonds in the hair. So when you're thinking in terms of texture services, it's important to know that. You also want to note the wave pattern may also vary from strand to strand on the same person's head. It is not uncommon for an individual to have different amounts of curl in different areas of the head. So for example, my sides of my hair tend to curl up a lot, my back of my hair not so much. When you're working with ethnic hair, you'll learn that there's different curl patterns in the head. So my cousin has the most amazing curl pattern where she's very tight up here but a little bit loose in the back. And what we do to even it out, we use a thiophene straightening solution to loosen this up to match the back. Knowing this will also help you know how to better your services. You also want to know that there's different theories. The most popular theory claims the shape of the person's hair's cross-section determines the amount of curl. This theory claims that hair with a round cross-section is straight, hair with an oval to flattened oval is wavy or curly, and hair with a flattened to flattened oval cross-section is extremely curly. And what that goes on about is if you looked at the cross-section of kinky coily hair that would be part of an afro texture, it's like thick, but as you make a turn, it's thin, and then it's like a thick oval, and then a very thin oval. That don't be too worried about that, because that theory is one theory. Another one will try to explain this by saying that varying degrees of curl, that is, in curly hair on one side of the hair grows faster than the other side. Since the side that grows faster will be slightly longer and longer than the slower growing side, tension within the strand causes the long side to curl around the short side. Hair that grows uniformly on both sides does not create tension and results in straight hair. This theory is unproven. We've always thought it was confusing. We really don't use this theory as much. Know that the shape of the cross-section does not always relate to the amount of curl. That's kind of why our best theory, we have some knowledge, we don't have enough to approve it to everyone. Some even say the type of follicle is important, so it'll show you like how the hair is shaped on page 225. So know that extreme curly hair, that's the next part, it grows in long twisted spirals. Cross sections appear flattened and vary in shape and thickness along the hair length. Compared to straight or wavy hair, which possesses a fairly regular and uniform diameter along a single strand, extremely curly hair is irregular, showing varying degrees of diameter along a single hair strand. So what that means is, like when I said straight hair is just like, like this. Wavy hair may have a little bit of a bend, but coily hair twists and has a thin bend. Every time it twists, the hair gets weaker. That's why someone with very thick, kinky, coily hair may have a hard time getting healthy, really long hair, because what happens is that over time, as you've been exposed to the environment and different damaging products, it can cause breakage, which causes shedding up here. And this also relates to some myths we hear in the salon or what our clients want. They want us to give them the world. They want to look 20 years younger and have this amazing hair that may not be possible. So what we try to do is we try to compromise. So when it comes to hair length, when people says, oh, I wish I had hair as long and healthy as you, it may not be possible. You want your hair as healthy as it can be, and for some people, getting your hair as healthy as it can be may only be getting it this long before it starts to get unhealthy. But if you're careful with it, with all our modern products, you might be able to overcome that. Everyone's hair follicle also has a different lifespan, which we'll cover next in the hair growth. If you think about extremely coiled hair, they're using the analogy of like a telephone. For those of you that remember, if you had an old phone where you would dial, like back in the 90s, if you are too young to remember that, just try to Google it, look up rotary phone with the coiled telephone line. That's what coiled hair is like. If you think about the stress you have to do to untangle that, that's what the texture is like. Extremely curly hair will often have a low elasticity, break easily, and has a tendency to knot, especially on the ends. So if you think about that phone cord analogy, the old phones, I remember when it was a big technology to hook it up to the end and prevent the phone cord from tangling, you used to get these horrible knots that would occur with the phone, and then what happened was because it was too knotted up, it would cause the wires inside to fray, so you'd be on the phone with a friend and it would start to sound like muffled. That's how kinky coily hair is. It might have, it might be prone to being dry, breaking. Gentle scalp manipulations and conditioning shampoos and a detangling rinse help to minimize tangles. So this is part of building your product box for that client. They'll need to use a spray, a specialized shampoo and conditioner, and a treatment. I'm going to talk a little bit about hair growth and we're going to take a break. So hair growth has, there's two types of hair follicles found in the body, vellus hair and terminal hair. Vellus hair is also known as lanugo hair. It's very short, fine, and unpigmented. It's downy hair that appears in the body. Vellus hair almost never has medulla. It's commonly found on infants and it can be present on children until the puberty age. On grown adults, vellus hair is usually found in places normally considered hairless, such as the forehead, the eyelids, and a bald scalp. One of the theories for balding is that it gets replaced with vellus hair. Let's see what else it says. As well as nearly all other areas of body except the palms of the hand and soles in the feet. Women normally retain 55% more vellus hair than men. And vellus hair helps with the evaporation of perspiration, so that also leads to one of the theories on why when men sweat more, they smell worse, because we don't have that vellus hair that will help to evaporate, whereas women do. Terminal hair is long, coarse, pigmented hair found on the scalp, legs, arms, and bodies of males and female. Terminal hair is coarser than vellus hair, with the exception of gray hair. It is pigmented, with the exception of gray hair, it is pigmented. It usually has medulla. Hormone changes during puberty cause some areas of fine vellus hair to be replaced with thicker terminal hair. All hair follicles are capable of producing either vellus or terminal hair, depending on genetics, age, and hormones. So some of the new research we're now having about anti-aging science is actually learning the molecular process of the hair follicle and learning how to retrain that follicle to convert the vellus hair back into thick terminal hair. So when you're doing research into balding and why people bald, what we're looking at now is using different gene therapies and stem cells to convert on the scalp that hair follicle back into our thick terminal hair so we can try to reverse balding. There's different reasons as to why this occurs. I went to one seminar and one of the treatments we're using now is PRP, is the least invasive one, but there's going to be additional things that are coming out in the future, so you might get better transplants, potentially non-invasive transplants, and even special solutions that you can actually put on once and then it will reverse the effects of the hair loss. So it's important to also understand that hair goes through a cycle of growth. There are 3 types of the cycle. I always tell my students to remember ACT, which stands for the phases: anagen, catagen, and telogen. The first phase, anagen, is going to be the growth phase. This is going to be where new hair is produced. New cells are actively going to manufacture that hair. The average growth of a healthy hair scalp is about ½ an inch per month. This may be more or less depending on the person's genes. The rate of growth varies on different parts of the body and between sexes and with age. Scalp hair grows faster on women than men. Scalp hair grows rapidly between the ages of 15 and 30, but slows down sharply after the age of 50. About 90% of scalp hair is growing in the anagen phase at any time. The anagen phase generally lasts from 3 to 5 years, but in some cases it can last as long as 10 years. The longer the anagen cycle is, the longer the hair is able to grow. This is why some people can only grow hair down to shoulders, while others can grow it down to the floor. I'm going to come back, take a 5-minute break, and I'm going to finish with the catagen and telogen phase.